with some of the announcements. The next meeting is 2 weeks from tonight, again, Monday night. And the topic is dealing with uncertainty. And that one has been announced on the website, meetup.com. I have two ideas for January. These aren't on the schedule out there yet, and I may change my mind, but this is what I'm thinking of. On January 9th, it's the new year. You know, traditionally everybody comes up with New Year's resolutions and so on. Well, we're going to have a discussion on lying and self-deception and the relationship between those two. That'll be on January 9th, and then on the 23rd, I think we're going to do American exceptionalism. You know, is America really exceptional? If so, what do people mean by that? What do other people think about that? So on. Okay. So those are the upcoming topics. I talked a little bit about the schedule. I mean, we always announce that the meeting starts at 6:30. That is really when people start showing up. So I mean, if you're coming to the next meeting, you don't have to be here, you know, before 6:30 to make sure you're on time. I mean, start coming in at 6:30 to 6:45. That's when people come in, and you know, we socialize for a while, and then about 6:45 typically we start with announcements. A few words about the way the discussion operates. This is probably a relatively typical size for our discussion groups. I don't make any great effort to, you know, expand the size of the group, primarily because as you get more and more people, then people feel more and more intimidated about saying anything. There's Bill. You're not in your cart tonight. You're not in your cart tonight.
No.
Doing better. Okay.
It's up and down.
So as the group gets larger, I mean, people feel like, you know, well, I'm a little more hesitant to say anything, particularly if I'm new, I want to wait to get my feet wet. With a group this size, I guarantee you, you know, you're probably going to say something. Okay. I've had people call up and say, you know, I'd like to come to the meeting. Is it okay if I sit there and, you know, just listen? Say, yeah, that's okay, but it's probably not going to happen. Okay. Now, at the same time, I mean, we try to enforce a few rules, more or less religiously, depending on the size of the group. But basically, we try to have only one person talking at a time. No one-on-one conversations, no one-on-one confrontations. I mean, basically, you're addressing your comments to the group as a whole. The idea is to get people's perspectives out there for two reasons. One, so that the person talking hears themselves saying this in public, and sometimes what I've found is I'll say something and say, that's really stupid when I say it out loud. Okay? So that's part of the idea. It isn't necessarily just to hear what other people have to say. Sometimes it's to hear what you have to say in a public forum. The other is obviously to hear what some other people have to say. We're not trying to persuade anybody to any particular point of view. The whole idea is to hear other people's perspective and then somehow incorporate that into your own point of view. Okay? Okay, in terms of how it generally works, we don't ask that anybody read anything ahead of time or prepare in any way. I'm not necessarily preventing people from doing that, but I mean, you shouldn't feel like you have to bone up on a subject, you know, to participate. I tend to be the only one that participates, and the reason I'm the only one that prepares. And the reason I prepare is I typically put together sort of an outline of where I think the discussion might go. I come up with some leading questions that I'll throw out. Say, okay, well, what do you think about this? Okay. Some discussions are, I'm going to say, more educational than others. We've had some topics where I wouldn't expect people to know a lot about that topic ahead of time. So, I mean, I may bring in some information just to get people familiar with what we're talking about. In other cases, it's maybe some very controversial topic that everybody has some opinion on, and I don't have to do anything in terms of putting the context. Tonight, I'm guessing is going to be a little bit of a mixture. Not so much that we're going to be talking about something you don't know about, but to provide a perspective, context in which to discuss it. So I'm going to start with this sort of introduction. The topic is our broken government. I mean, a number of people talk about our government is in some sense broken right now. Well, what does that mean? And it occurred to me there are at least 3 ways that you can talk about government being broken. First of all, you can say government is not performing some function that it should be performing. Okay? Or the converse of that is the government is doing things it shouldn't be doing. Okay? Or the third way is, yes, they're doing what they should be doing, but they're not doing it very well. Okay? So a lot of our discussion is going to sort of start from that premise that, okay, we have to have some idea of what is it that government should be doing in the first place before we can really talk about, well, how is it broken? Okay?
No, you get to draw 2 more. This one's a
Now,
4.
this may go without saying too, but I mean, there are a couple ways we can talk about what's broken. We can talk at a very detailed level. We could say, I went to get my driver's license and it took me 5 hours to do it. That's broken. Okay, well, that's a very detailed level, and we're not going to get down to that level. Okay, we're going to be dealing with more the generalities. Okay, with that as a preliminary then, I thought we'd spend some amount of time, maybe a significant amount of time at the beginning here, simply addressing the question of what should the government be doing? Okay? And we're probably talking more at the federal level than the local level. Okay? Now, I mean, what little research I did on this, first of all, you can be dealing with matters of opinion. You can say, well, I think, this is a government function, but somebody else might not agree. Okay? Or you can also deal on a more factual level and say, hey, in the U.S., our form of government is this. These are the functions that we have associated with our form of government. Okay? And I prefer to try to keep it at that level. Okay? So, given that as sort of an opening question, what are the functions of government in our system?
What's this? You get to play that nice draw 4, and you get to call me.
On the federal level, it was supposed to be only to defend the common good of America. Common defense, if you will. That was one of the only, if not the only, purpose of the federal government.
He knows what she's doing. It's
Okay, keep that in mind. I want to see if anybody else wants to add something to it.
Oh, we're gonna skip
And then
John.
we're specifically going to address that. Okay, because hopefully what I'm going to point out is that's a misconception.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Skip.
Okay?
Oh, we're gonna skip me.
Well, I think currently it's the government's obligation
Oh, we're
to
gonna reverse it
support
to me.
our commerce. And one specific example would be the problem with cantaloupe production. Obviously, we need a little more regulation on the packers or whatever so that cantaloupe production doesn't get destroyed because of the outbreak of listeria. That's
Okay.
just one example.
You never
Okay.
know. You never
Others?
know.
Well, I guess there's something, I'm not sure how to articulate it, but something about maintaining the public good. In other words, making sure that people are safe in a lot of different ways, right? Making sure that medicines have been tested before they're allowed on the market. Making sure that, we're not getting poison food imported from other countries. Those kinds of things. Making sure that the people are treated fairly and are not, that are not being abused or
Could be someone.
suffering by the hands of others.
I like those
Okay.
gaps, that as long as you're burning it, it keeps working.
Other thoughts?
Keeps ticking.
And making sure, well, so I don't know about federal versus whatever,
Keeps on
but,
ticking, keeps on ticking.
you know, there are certain agreements that we make as a society so that things work,
That
like,
dates me, doesn't
you know,
it?
traffic lights. We all agree that red means stop and green means go, and, you know, what's a safe
I'm
speed and what
62.
isn't. And so sometimes certain branches of the government help keep those agreements.
My brain thinks I'm
Okay.
16.
I'm a little way naive about government stuff, but I mean, they
Most people
financially
think I'm 100.
support our country. I mean, we pay taxes, it all goes, and they decide where all the money's gonna go, what programs to support, what other countries get our money, what money we're gonna take from other countries. I mean, they are like the bank, the country bank, basically, so.
But I want to get back to your comment.
Yes, sir.
Because, I mean, I have heard this in a number of cases. People will say, you know, the only legitimate function of government is national defense.
Federal government, sir.
Federal government, right, federal government, okay? Where did that come from? I mean, where does that conception come from?
Well, basically, if you give more power to one entity, the more power that entity is going to have over you. I'm sorry, I'm on camera. That makes me nervous. But if you give power to an entity, it has the power to take away from you, which is why, in any case, except for national defense, I believe state government should be in charge. And I could go on about that if anyone
Oh,
would
Miss
like.
Dolly gets to talk too.
Okay, what I want to suggest is that what you're doing is, in one sense, expressing an opinion about what the federal government should do,
Yes, I do.
as opposed to what, let's say, the Constitution says our federal government should be doing.
Mr. Neal can ride too.
Okay, so, I mean, this is where I'm curious, when people say, you know, the only function of the federal government is X, what are they basing that on? And in our case, I mean, I think we really have to go to, well, what does the Constitution say the function of government is? Now, in that context, does anybody happen to remember the preamble to the Constitution? All of us presumably memorized it in school.
We the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect.
Okay, stop with that one. In order to form a more perfect union.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now, what does that imply? I mean, what does that say about the function of government?
Well, what I believe is that that wasn't supposed to be its only primary concern. Besides that, the states were supposed to be regulated as the states saw fit. It was only supposed to be unionize under the common good,
Uno.
and just to allow people to go from state to state as it was one nation. So basically, all in all, it was meant to be the United States,
And I get to go out.
but each state was to govern the way the people saw fit to govern. If people wanted to be more socialistic in a state, people would go to that state to live the way they wanted to live. Another way for capitalism, libertarian. I know I'm using political, but just the way people wanted to live, the state would accommodate that person.
Okay, go ahead.
You know, when, I would almost like to hear the rest of the preamble, because it was, I remember something about provide for, establish justice,
Provide for the
defense,
common
and
defense,
promote
general
General
welfare,
welfare.
security, blessings, and liberty to ordain and establish the Constitution
There
of the
you go.
United States.
Okay?
And I think those other things sort of encompass what we talked about a little bit, the general welfare.
Right, and I mean, what I'm suggesting is we're going to take each of those phrases, there are basically 6 of them, okay? And think about, well, what does that imply in terms of the function of government in our system, okay? Now, I mean, this first one, to form a more perfect union, our form of government is what's referred to as federalism.
I agree, it's much better.
And the idea is we
when you
do
don't
have
that.
separate states that each have governmental authority as part of an overall union. And that's different from, I remember reading Great Britain and France in particular. In those 2 countries, there's only one government. I mean, there's a national government, okay?
Once is enough.
In our country, that's not true, okay? We do have 50 states, all with their own sets of laws, their own sets of functions, so on, but as part of a union. And I mean, particularly when you get to the Civil War, that was part of the battle, if you will, okay? I mean, some of the states wanted to secede and say, we're not part of the union, and the rest of them are saying, sorry, you know, we all agreed, this is what we're gonna do, okay? So that was the first phrase, to form a more perfect union. Okay, the next one is to establish justice. What does that
You're
imply?
last. We've just been playing without you.
Yeah, we're saying that the government needs to establish laws. They basically have to establish the rules of the game, okay?
And arbitrate when people have disputes, which is often thought of as justice.
Okay, reverse it back to me.
Okay, so we assign that function to government, okay? Okay, to ensure domestic tranquility. What's that mean?
To ensure peace within the union.
Okay, police, okay, basically a police function. We have to have some body of government that's going to enforce those laws that government establishes, okay? To provide for the common defense is the one you mentioned at the beginning, right? Okay, so yeah, that is one of the functions, okay? To promote the general welfare. What's that
I snuck in.
mean? You gave an example,
I
right?
did, well, just talking about the idea that government should do whatever is necessary to ensure that people can make an honest living, if you will. And they'll be treated fairly by whatever the economic system is.
And, I mean, have some protection over their health and so on, okay? I mean, general welfare, just, I mean, we should all be, in one sense, as comfortable, as healthy, and so on as possible, okay? And the last one is a really interesting one, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. That says the government also has to have a long-term view. Okay, some of what they're doing is not just for the current citizens. They also have to be looking ahead and doing something, whatever that means, for our posterity as well. Okay? So it's like preserving all of those things that we've just said we're supposed to have for our children as well. Okay? Now, the point of all of this was to say the function of government is perhaps far broader than most of us think, okay, as established in the Constitution, okay? So, I mean, just using that preamble, you can all of a sudden see, man, government's got an awful lot of responsibility over just, you know, the narrow provide for the national defense kind of thing, okay? Now, how have we been set up to do that? We have 3 branches of government. What are they?
Legislative, executive, judicial.
Okay, now let's take them each. What's the purpose of the executive branch in general? Yeah, but I mean, what does he run? I mean, does the president, for example,
Okay, it was my turn to go first. but-
enforce the laws?
Miss Dolly. Huh?
Actually, that is the function of the executive branch. Okay?
Just pardoned a turkey the other day.
The function of the executive branch is basically to enforce the laws. Does the executive branch establish those laws? No. Okay? They just enforce them. Okay? Now, the executive branch has some other functions. Okay? I mean, the president is the commander-in-chief, what? Of the Army, the Navy, so on. Okay? But in general, the function of the executive branch is to enforce the laws, to provide for the common defense, to basically have the police, to have the court system, okay? All of those functions that are designed to enforce the laws. Now, that is actually very, very broad, and one of the easiest ways to see that
You can name
is,
any
let's
color
talk
you
about the
want.
cabinet for a minute. What's the cabinet?
Anytime you want.
Those are the people that work alongside him?
Oh, wait.
They are part of the executive branch, okay? They basically report to the president ultimately, okay? What are some of the functions they
Okay,
do?
Geneva,
But
throw it at me.
there are a couple ways we could do this. I'm gonna throw out a name,
Tired of following
and you see if you can come up with
reverse it
the
and
department that they're the head
This
of.
could be pretty confronting.
It could, yeah.
Let's start with Hillary Clinton. I
Yeah,
know what
Hillary
it's-
Clinton,
Thank you.
okay?
Reverse
Hillary
it back to
Clinton.
me.
What department?
State.
Okay, Department of State. What's their function?
Yes, Geneva's.
Interact with other countries, it's,
Yeah, I mean, that's an easy way to say it, right?
Like the face of our country kind of a thing?
Face of our country to the rest of the world, right? All of the diplomatic corps and so on are part of the Department of State. That's clearly a function of government, and in our government, it's part of the executive branch, okay? Tim Geithner,
Treasury.
Treasury, Department of the Treasury.
Yeah, Joe.
What do they do?
Okay, Bob.
Sign my money.
Yeah, sign your money, print your money, okay?
To
take,
you, Mr. Geneva.
track your money.
Yeah, I mean, also, I mean, when they talk about they're moving the interest rates, okay? I mean, that's the Department of the Treasury. What are they doing? They're deciding how much banks are gonna have to pay basically to borrow money
Back to Miss Geneva.
to, you know, keep the economy afloat and so on,
No,
okay?
that's a reverse.
Leon Panetta,
Defense.
Blue or a reverse?
Defense Department, okay? Army, the Navy, the Air Force, so on, okay? All of the Department of Defense. Now we're getting harder. Eric Holder. No cheating. Eric Holder. See, I told you it was getting harder.
Agriculture.
Justice.
Justice,
Bilson.
Department of Justice, yes. Department of Justice, okay? Now,
Oh, you can play that.
this has nothing to do with the Supreme Court, okay?
What do you say, she?
Okay, so what's the Department of Justice doing?
That was-
They're the ones prosecuting people who are violating federal law,
But it was to you.
okay? So, I
You're
mean,
making me draw all those.
if
It
they,
was your turn.
well, when they caught Timothy McVeigh, we'll say, I mean, the Department of Justice is who's gonna prosecute, okay? Toughie. Ken Salazar,
Yeah.
Department of Interior.
Wasn't he Colorado or something?
Yes.
Yes, he was, he was a senator.
So that's, isn't that to do with lands and their use?
Mhm. Yep, so like all the national park system,
But it's also,
oil permits and stuff would go through Department of the Interior, okay?
Whatever.
are they the ones who tell pay the farmers to not grow certain crops and stuff?
No,
Before you go too far, you might mention
I know what it was.
the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, is under Treasury.
Ah,
that's right.
that's a big.
Yep,
And under the Department of Defense, you have the FBI.
Jerry.
Yeah, other-
right. Yeah. And I mean, what you should be getting out of all of this is, in effect, a broader sense of the functions of government. I mean, because the things we've mentioned so far, I mean, I don't think anybody would say government shouldn't be doing that. I mean, we obviously need a Department of State, you know, Treasury Department and so on, okay? Tough name here, Tom Vilsack.
Jerry wanted a different kind of relationship.
Agriculture, Department of Agriculture.
Jerry wants,
They're the ones who pay the farmers not to grow the
Yeah. Okay,
he has made it very clear
or whatever.
that she does not want to.
I'll be amazed if anybody gets this. Gary Locke,
Who was that one?
Gary Locke, L-O-C-K-E.
And my understanding is, I can't remember the name.
Department of Commerce, what would they do?
They would.
Regulate the trucks coming up here from Mexico, among other things.
Exactly, okay, and that's a lot of what they would do. They'd regulate trucking, okay, transportation, stuff like that. Here's another toughie, Hilda Solis, Department of Labor,
He does, but his kids does.
okay, what would they do?
You know, his one was,
They had all the employment, unemployment?
I think so. Any-
Yeah, I would say they probably handle unemployment, they probably are the ones that would get involved with unemployment insurance, what else? Well, regulations on when companies have to pay overtime.
Is OSHA under that?
Could be, I'm not sure, yeah. Kathleen Sebelius.
Brenda's said she needed here.
Yeah, there you go. Health and Human Services.
There used to be somebody else and I was running somebody else.
Do they run the hospital, I'm guessing? Department of Health?
They run Medicare, do they run Social Security? No, I think that's just Medicare.
National Institute of Health, is that under
Yeah,
them?
That would be under there. Sean Donovan,
Education?
Housing and Urban Development. Okay, Housing and Urban Development.
Now, would they have things to do with codes, or is that more like on a state level?
They wouldn't have to do with building codes per se, but they, I would think, are the ones that come up with public housing requirements. Something
A
like that.
question, just one, would they, are they involved in this foreclosure mess at all, or do you know?
I would imagine they're involved, but I mean, some of that also comes out of Treasury.
That guy right there.
Oh, we may have missed it. Ray LaHood, Department of Transportation. Now, that may be roads, bridges.
Yeah, I would think, I was thinking commerce might be more like when two big companies are gonna merge. Is that, I mean, or,
Isn't that,
yeah, that's
the,
possible.
is that the SEC that handles that?
Oh,
Yeah, you're right.
Security.
I don't know which department the FCC is in.
Oh, poor Geneva.
I mean, which actually, I mean, that makes another point. Not only does government have more functions that we may have initially assumed, but a lot of them are, well, they're more obscure in one sense that we would think. I mean, there's an awful lot going on, yeah. Yeah, and that's true too. There's an awful lot that overlaps.
She just said OSHA, that's safety and health in the workplace, but that's not under Department of Health,
Right,
you know.
It's
yeah.
under labor.
Yeah.
And I remember, didn't some politician was making some point recently when they were talking about salmon, like who regulates the salmon industry?
Oh,
And it was, it depends on where the salmon is. It's like when they're out in the ocean, that's one department. When they get in the rivers, that's another department. When they're being canned and distributed, that's another department. So yeah, there's a lot of overlap on a lot of these functions. I'm trying to decide who's
It's the
responsible.
wonder anything gets done.
True. Okay. Stephen Chu.
FCC under commerce, that seems like.
Yeah, Stephen Chu. This is interesting. He's a scientist.
Oh,
Department of Energy. There you go, Department of Energy. So when we start talking about alternative energy sources and so on, this is the guy.
That's the department Rick Perry forgot that he was gonna eliminate.
That's
yeah.
right.
Which department is this?
Department of Energy.
Energy,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Good old record.
He remembered it
Yeah.
a few minutes later.
A few days later.
After asking Ron Paul?
Arnie Duncan. Arnie Duncan. Department of Education.
Should have seen that.
Department of Education.
He would have got it.
Eric Shinseki.
Oh, is he, whatever, social security?
You should know him.
Social security.
No, VA.
Oh, VA, Veterans Affairs, that's where I had his name.
Now, that's an interesting one. I mean, that very clearly fits into the, like, public welfare kinds of things. And, long-term, I mean, you're dealing with people who maybe served in the military when they were in their 20s, but in their 60s, they need services. Okay. So, I mean, you definitely got to be looking ahead.
Does that department handle like all military benefits and stuff in general? Or they-
I
Okay.
think so.
I know some guys who have a complaint with him.
Department of Defense.
Okay, last one.
Fair enough.
What? No, we did Department of Defense.
No, the
Oh,
military benefits department
oh, okay.
handles
Yes, and reverse.
retired pay and that sort of thing.
Oh, pay, right, but the benefits like health,
Didn't hurt that, did
education
it?
are out of the
Sometimes
VA,
it's
right?
to your advantage.
No, the retired benefits are out of the
But
Defense
that's my
Department, not out of
understanding.
VA.
Okay.
The, just
That's, I've
discharge.
forgotten how fast I had kind of got.
They would also be involved in home loans.
Yeah.
It's getting Jerry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But like if
Instead
you're
of HUD.
GI,
Yeah, instead of HUD,
or
right.
FHA.
Yeah,
Is it cutting FHA? Does it?
Now that
I think FHA may be part of HUD, yeah.
leads to a question. FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac,
But even just
who do those belong to?
That one's tricky because they're actually private companies.
Partly.
But were they
Yeah,
partly owned by the
they're,
government?
they're backed by the government, but they're private companies.
They're back, they're not owned.
fast as
Yeah.
my
Now,
name is my
if they
name.
run short of money, it's the
The
taxpayer.
taxpayers kick in, if they make a profit, it's theirs. Yeah.
And if they don't make a profit, they pay $1 million bonuses with taxpayer money.
Yeah. Okay, last department in the cabinet,
I would make it.
okay? Janet Napolitano,
Meal.
Is that social security?
Homeland
no,
Security.
Homeland
Homeland
Security,
Security. I should
okay?
know that.
One of our newest departments, okay?
I have a beef
So,
with them.
yeah, but, I mean, that illustrates also, this is a dynamic process. I mean, I doubt that HUD was around, you know, in the early 1800s, okay? So a lot of these departments have come up over the years out of necessity.
How often do these positions come up for renewal?
He is,
Like,
he's just very.
how long do these people stay in these positions?
Well, it's the
Yeah.
cabinet,
Is it just
so
a
aren't they
term or-
reporting?
It's a cabinet position, the president chooses them.
So if there's a different president, there's a different cabinet.
Trouble.
So
Yes,
they could be appointed every 4 years?
yes,
So he started
or
getting-
more often,
More often,
Or more?
they don't.
Okay,
Yeah.
they don't do that.
right. Okay,
So you get someone like Greenspan who just mystifies everyone for
yeah, for a long time.
For how long?
for long,
Yeah.
a long, long time.
Well, the same happened in defense,
Yeah.
okay? I mean, in defense, we had a cabinet minister who, Gates, went from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. So, I mean, they do serve at the pleasure of the president. That doesn't necessarily mean they change when a new president comes in.
Companionship in any way.
Okay, that's one branch that we've talked about. Okay, the legislative branch. Okay, what's the function of the legislative branch?
Write laws.
Decide on the laws.
Okay, make the laws. Okay, they have another major function.
You can go to war.
That's tricky. Let's come back to that. Okay, but there's another very major function of the legislative branch. What's been the whole hassle this whole year?
The budget.
Proposed budget.
Yeah, I mean, the legislative branch is the branch that spends the money, okay? They're the ones that decide how much is going to be spent, what it's going to be spent on, okay? So now if we go back to war, okay? Who declares war?
Congress, typically.
Yeah, now isn't that interesting, since the head of the military is the president? Okay. Now, can the president, in effect, start a war before it's been approved?
Well, the whole thing was set up between the three branches with checks and balances. So no one of the branches can make a decision that, you know, is that big on their own.
Right. Okay. So particularly if you take the war part, I mean, the president, as the commander of the military, I mean, can in fact start fighting. Okay. What's the limitation? The legislative branch can say, we're not giving you any money.
I just love it when I get
60 days.
Yeah, I mean, there's a time frame in there. And why is there a time frame? I mean, why do we let the president, in effect, start a war before it's been approved?
Because emergency.
Yeah, I mean, very practical reasons, right? Somebody just invaded us, you don't want to have to wait for a legislative, I mean, some committee in the legislature to get
years.
together and say, well, let's talk about this for a while. No, I mean, we gotta go to war now, okay?
So, but can the legislative branch
No, it has to be yellow.
go to war on their own without the president's approval?
No,
Okay.
they don't have
So
a
they have to
military.
have, okay,
Right.
okay.
Yeah,
Like, well, you gotta have one without the
Technically
other.
could
yeah,
declare war.
they don't have a military.
They can
But they can declare war.
They could declare war, right, and then if, in effect, the president could say, but I'm not gonna fight it.
Right.
Okay, I mean, that's the checks and balances part, okay? So, I mean, certainly back in the Cold War days, with the possibility that the Soviet Union was gonna launch missiles at us, I mean, you didn't wanna have to sit there and say, well, we've gotta get the legislative branch together
No, can't-
to decide whether to declare war or not. No, we wanted the president to, pick up the phone and say, launch a retaliatory strike. Then we go to Congress and say, hey, here's what the situation is, will you approve this? Okay? So, keep that in mind in all of this. I mean, there are checks and balances built into the system.
Has to be yellow.
So, the executive branch can fight the war, but the legislative branch is the one that's gonna fund it. The legislative branch could declare war,
Okay, don't.
but then the executive branch could say, but we're not gonna fight it. Okay. Okay, what's the composition of the legislative branch? We've talked about the president and the cabinet and the executive branch. Now what is the
The
legislative
Senate and the House of
branch?
Representatives.
Okay, Senate and the House of Representatives, right? What's the Senate look like? What's the composition of the Senate?
The Senate is compiled of 2 representatives from each state.
Okay,
While Congress is accumulated from, I think it's 2 from Rhode Island or 1 from Rhode Island, all the way up to 7, or 6 or 7 from
yeah.
Texas.
Every state is guaranteed, I think it's at least 1, it might be 2. There's a guaranteed minimum. But then, once you get beyond that minimum, what's it based on? Population, okay? I mean, the more the population of the state, the more representatives you get, okay? And we're gonna come back to that a little later,
So you only have to draw one.
okay? So, those are the 2
Get a green one.
houses of the legislative branch. Okay, what about the judicial branch? What's their function?
The Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's the Supreme Court and what else?
Versus.
There is another part.
All federal courts.
Yeah, all federal courts, okay? All federal
Yes,
courts.
you can.
Okay, and there's some, was it 9,
There we go.
11? Forgotten how many, but I mean, there are a number of federal courts, okay? And they are also part of the judicial department, judicial branch of government. What's their function? What are they there for? Can they decide to spend money? Can they wage war?
One of their functions is to determine whether a legislative piece or executive piece of order or paper is constitutional or not.
Okay, and that's probably stated very simply, what their function is, to decide whether all of those laws that got passed are constitutional.
But they don't do that unless somebody challenges one of those laws.
Right, that's an interesting point there too. They're not just sitting there all the time reviewing it, okay? They're just sitting there waiting for somebody to come to them and challenge, okay? Challenge.
Basically, they're just passing laws as long as everyone agrees with the law, it's good to go.
No,
Unless
Yeah.
someone says, hold on a second.
But in this country, somebody's going to.
Yeah,
With that S1, the S.186 bill, the martial law bill, that needs to be brought up to them from the Senate.
yeah, I mean, it's sort of interesting who can bring it up. I mean, courts sometimes throw stuff out because they say, you can't challenge it because you weren't harmed in any way.
Yeah, the person who would have to bring it up would have to be a detained person who would have no access to be able to bring it up.
Yeah, it's an interesting catch-22.
You have to have grounds to be able to, you have to have standing to be able to challenge the law. Well, if you can't even get out of your jail cell because you're detained indefinitely and you have no access to a lawyer, then
That's
you're,
going to come up a little later in the discussion too.
yeah.
Who would that be?
Don't believe I've ever seen this.
No access to a lawyer.
A
Detainees,
detainee,
Well, I think even Guantanamo detainees have access to lawyers.
they do now.
they do now, yeah.
Yeah, they do now.
So who doesn't?
Yeah.
There has been an American who went overseas and was captured there and then got taken to Guantanamo Bay, and he was detained indefinitely. And Bradley Manning, who was the person who did the WikiLeaks
Reverse it to Miss
leak
Dollar.
of government information, he's been detained indefinitely. And
Reverses it to me.
uh,
And we're gonna skip. to
Doesn't
me.
have access to a lawyer.
no,
Doesn't he have a lawyer?
he's
Detained indefinitely.
he would have a military lawyer appointed to him.
I think, right now, at least, everybody is provided a lawyer, has access to a lawyer. That we know of.
But the military justice system is separate from the system that would lead up to the Supreme Court.
Usually, yes.
So what you're saying, am I right, what you're saying is that the people who are in that system, who are detained in that system, and the only lawyer they have is provided by the military, would not have access to dispute something to the Supreme Court, because the military lawyers don't go there?
Especially when they're being detained without a lawyer for years at a time, because it's deemed an intelligence threat.
Have any of you read that much about the bill that got passed through the Senate within the past 3 days to the latest defense appropriations thing?
Both of us have.
Yeah. It's really scary.
Yeah, it is.
It is really scary.
I commented the other day on my Facebook page that it reminds me of Germany in the 1930s and how they were putting people in concentration camps just because they belonged to the wrong political party.
So what?
Okay, first of all, the bill that got passed has a lot more stuff in it. I mean, it's basically a funding bill, okay? But it has an amendment to it, or an addition to it, that basically says someone who is perceived as, let's say, a terrorist threat can be detained indefinitely by the military without charge.
And this is an American citizen
Yeah.
on U.S. soil that this could apply to.
Right.
Whereas if you write something on Facebook that could be determined to be a terrorist threat, whatever it could be, the military could come and arrest you and detain you indefinitely.
Both Dax and I have been a part of the occupation group here, and if they deemed that we were, trying to incite civil unrest, we could be detained indefinitely.
Just for demonstrating.
Just for
I'm telling you,
demonstrating.
It is scary.
Yeah.
It's taking a little bit of rights away from.
Yes.
Yes,
it
a
is.
lot of rights.
And we'll talk about it a little later, and when we get to
Somebody
the.
needs to make an issue out of it right away.
Oh, the hope right now is that Obama's going to veto it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You'd all tried to put an amendment to it, I think,
Yeah.
that would modify it.
And so did Feinstein in California. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's scary that it passed, because it passed.
Well, it passed 93%.
Oh, yeah,
That's
yeah.
what's
I mean, it
worse.
was like overwhelming.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's scary. Okay, in any case, the judicial branch is there basically to decide whether the laws that have actually been passed are constitutional. But they can only do that when someone challenges that. They're not just sitting there, in effect reviewing the laws that are being passed and passing judgment on them. They're only passing judgment when somebody challenges that. And the person challenging it has to have some vested interest. Okay. Again, you can't have somebody else, maybe even outside the judicial department, just reviewing laws and saying, well, this one doesn't look very good, I'll take it to the Supreme Court. Unless they are actually affected,
Couldn't you say, though, that with balanced political parties, that generally laws don't get passed? Most of the legislators are lawyers, and they have a lot of legal advice. Most of the laws that get passed
Gonna reverse it to me.
will
And I can't.
pass
So it's your turn, Miss Dolly.
judicial review. So there's just
You get to
a
draw two.
small percentage of
You got
laws
to draw.
that are questionable,
No, you get to draw
and
two.
that tends to filter out the workload for the Supreme Court and the other courts.
I think what happens is, it's not so much that a law gets passed and then somebody says, okay, this law is clearly unconstitutional, it needs to be tossed out. It's more in the interpretation. You know, I mean, somebody passes a law, and then somebody has to decide, well, what did that really mean? You know, how does it apply to this particular situation?
It doesn't go straight to the Supreme Court either at that point. It starts at the local level and state, federal, and then
Yeah.
they finally say, okay, take this Supreme Court.
Well, I mean, the controversy right now over Obamacare, you know, that got passed, what, 3 years ago? And I mean, it's just now reached the Supreme Court. And it's not as if there weren't people screaming immediately, you know, we don't think this is constitutional. It took that long to filter through the court system, okay?
We have a case here where, in order to get standing to fight the camping ordinance for Colorado Springs, Steve Bass got himself arrested he was the only protester that set up a tent that night. He took one for the team to get the standing in order to have a court decide whether or not that camping ordinance violated people's rights to peaceably assemble. Well, he went to his first hearing, and he had to file waivers on all the paperwork that they did because, well, first off, they charged him for a crime in the future because they got the date wrong, you know, and he could have gotten off. He could have had the charges voided right there. But instead, he had to file waivers just to keep his standing. He had to let them amend their own paperwork, you know. And standing is very important if you want to fight a law to get it overturned.
That's usually my next
Yeah.
level new cook. Well, because it's.
Question about this law we're talking about, this, it's been attached to the Defense Appropriation Bill. Would this be one where the president could do what I think they call a signing statement, where he in essence says, I don't intend to enforce this particular part of this
Bring my own
bill?
of course.
I assume he could. I mean, at the moment, it seems more likely he's
I
going to
enjoy
veto.
playing games.
But he has to veto the whole Defense Appropriation Bill, that's the problem,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Yes.
I mean, that's the tricky part. And that's also one reason why it passed so overwhelmingly. Because, I mean, people are sitting there making a value judgment. I've got a bill here that does, you know, 95% good things, and 5% of it doesn't. Now what do I do? And that's exactly why they tack on a lot of these riders to bills. You know, it's like, yeah, this much of the bill, everybody agrees is great, so I'm gonna stick something else in there, and now people have to make a decision. So that's tough.
Even if Obama decided that he wasn't going to enforce that portion of the law, he's not going to be the president forever.
Yeah.
And do you trust future presidents, given that we swing like a pendulum politically every 4 to 8 years?
It's also not obvious that he would necessarily be the one to make the decision. I mean, it could be, you know, a local military commander in the National Guard or something that says, you know, I think this guy is a threat. Throw him in jail. Well, not in jail, throw him in a military prison.
Well, actually, if I read the bill right, it said the president had the power.
I was listening to a program actually today that was talking about, you know, well, who makes the decision? And it sounded like it was a little vague.
Well, if it's vague, you know they're going to take advantage of it.
Oh, yeah.
There's another thing, though, what about the Posse Comitatus Act that prohibits using the military to arrest civilians?
I think that was repealed.
Pardon?
Wasn't that repealed?
I don't think so.
I'll see everybody on
It
Monday.
hasn't been repealed.
Not sooner.
It's very powerful.
See what I help.
Law, it's
I just
always
need to
stayed
put
in
this
effect.
stuff away and pick it up.
Because I heard it was repealed. And
Storeroom, so
If it's
I'm
not,
on.
then that bill
Thanks,
makes
I
it.
appreciate that. I always appreciate your help.
That's a good challenge.
That was some of the defense on the bill too. It was saying, well, really all we're doing is formalizing what's been happening for the past 10 years.
Yeah. And that's why I get
And I
it.
mean, in a sense, they're right. I mean, a lot of the Patriot Act eroded some of the freedoms, and I mean, what they've been saying is they really have been doing some of this. So now all they're doing is putting it into law, you know. Well, that's a little shaky, but, okay. With what we've done so far, I mean, we've been trying to provide a context to say, okay, the functions of government are really pretty broad. I mean, there are a lot of functions there that most of us would agree, either by design or just by practice, yes, those have become functions of government, and it's very complex, okay? So now when we start saying it's broken, okay, the government is broken, remember there are three ways we can do it. We can say government is doing something it shouldn't be doing, it's not doing something it should be doing, or it's doing something it should be doing, but it's not doing it very well, okay? All right, what we want to do now is,
Fourth one.
sure,
It's doing everything it should be doing and it's doing it right.
yeah.
For mathematical completeness.
Right. Well, actually, there's an interesting aspect of that, and that gets back to sort of what we started with initially. We can talk about what the functions of government are from a factual standpoint. We can say, let's look at our documents. Our documents say, yes, this is something government should be doing. But there's also a matter of opinion. Some people could say, government ought to be doing this. It may not be spelled out, in the Constitution, but it ought to be doing it. And I mean, I'd take maybe an example of anything to do with the airline industry now. I mean, the founding fathers certainly had no idea, that we were going to be flying planes around. So, I mean, you're not going to find anything in the Constitution that's specific that would say, yeah, we ought to have an FAA, okay? But, I mean, most of us would agree that certainly is a logical function of government, okay? Well, we can certainly, taking Bill's point, say the government is doing everything that's spelled out anywhere that they ought to be doing, they're doing it very well, and somebody is going to say, yeah, but in my opinion, they shouldn't be doing that. So from an opinion point of view, they could say it's broken, Or they could say, yeah, it's doing all those things, it's doing it great, but there are these other things that ought to be doing as well, and they're not doing those, okay? An example might be climate change debate. Okay, we could say, okay, there's nothing in the Constitution that says we ought to be limiting CO2 emissions or something. But some people might very legitimately say, yeah, but that's implied in these other things, and we ought to be doing that.
Well, I call that implied as a human being, looking out for your ancestors, not ancestors, but offspring.
Yeah, your offspring, right. Yeah, I mean, some people would certainly look at things like that and say, this implies they ought to be doing this. Okay.
For our southern posterity.
Yeah,
Right.
secure the blessings of
So, yeah.
Right. Okay.
And I think breathing is a good liberty to have.
I agree.
I'm addicted to oxygen too.
Yeah.
Wow. Small world.
Crazy.
Okay, so now we're going to move into,
CO2.
we're now going to move into, okay, in what ways is government broken? And I want us to start with this. In some respects, government is broken by design, okay? It was intended, in one sense, to be broken, okay? If we approach it certainly from the standpoint of efficiency, or being able to respond quickly, okay?
I got that
Government's
feeling.
broken.
I got that feeling when I read the Constitution that they all went home and had a party and said, "Yay, we invented government that doesn't work and can't ever, affect our lives, and we can be free of them."
Right, okay? And I mean, you hear jokes about, well, Congress is in recess. We need to celebrate, that's a good thing, okay? So, I mean, we need to keep that in mind, that in some respects, government is broken by design. It was intended to be broken, okay? We've mentioned the checks and balances, okay? If all we were concerned about was national defense, okay? Give it all to the executive branch. Let them decide who we're going to fight, when we're going to fight. It's very efficient. The commander-in-chief decides today we're going to war, and there we are, okay? But we didn't do it that way. We intentionally set up the government so that couldn't happen, okay? So, we have done things to intentionally break government, and that's one of them, checks and balances. What's the Electoral College? Okay.
we have representatives that place a vote in place of counting each and every vote of every person. Each region has its own electoral college representative, and that person places a vote, in place of all those people, and hopefully reflects the will of the people.
Why did they set it up?
Yeah. Actually, I've never been quite sure that was the intent, was to necessarily reflect the will of the people. It was to
That's right.
put in place the best person, and they were supposed to choose the best person, not necessarily the one that got the most votes.
Yeah.
And the assumption of our ancestors was that these men were better thinkers and better educated than the populace as a whole. They basically trust everybody to make the best decision.
Which at the time was probably true, because people out in the, in the boonies running their farm or whatever didn't have the information that we have today.
We didn't have people memorizing the preamble to the Constitution in high school and then remembering
That's
it when
true.
they're adults.
But they probably didn't even know who was running for what office.
Yeah.
Of course, if they voted, I
in one sense, it's an extension. We have a representative form of government, right? I mean, we don't vote. I mean, we as individuals don't vote on most issues. We elect representatives to vote on our behalf. Well, that's what the Electoral College was. It was saying, maybe the average person doesn't have the smarts or the education or whatever to know who would be a good president. So instead, we're going to send representatives to the Electoral College
Rick Perry's
and
and
have
Sarah
them
Palin's.
do it.
It's terrible, terrible, terrible idea.
So that's the Electoral College, okay? It was intentionally designed in one sense as a way around, a fully democratic process, okay? Let's talk about the composition of the Senate. What was the idea of that?
2 representatives from every state.
Yeah, that's the composition. Does that make sense?
It
I
doesn't
mean, why
make
should
sense.
Rhode Island get the same representation as California?
I just heard the math for Wyoming versus California. Every person in Wyoming is worth 65 people in California in the Senate.
Yeah, in the Senate, right?
They wanted everybody to sign off on the Constitution.
Yeah, some of these we tend to look back and say, man, they were a bunch of really wise men that, set up this perfect form of government. No, in many cases, they were doing things to get it passed. Okay, it's like it went into committee, and they had to reach a compromise.
The way that I think that it still works now is that we have 50 different sets of laws in each state, and instead of having people represented by population, they're being represented by a group of state laws. Because we could have California, New York, and Texas monopolizing all the time that our legislature has, instead of having each set of laws get its own, time at the table.
Okay. Keep on the idea every state gets, 2 or whatever the number is. Why every state getting that?
I think.
Or what is that? What kind of body does that make the Senate?
A lot of that, though, had to do with the business of the slave and the non-slave states. They were struggling with the issue of how they were going to have representation and yet still maintain slavery in some states and other states. And the slave-holding states were pretty insistent that they have some equality in our government. And that was one way to assure it, is to say, you get 2 senators in the non-slave states, no matter how small or big they are.
The other way to assure it would to have been to make all the slaves voting people, and they weren't going to have that.
Yeah, well, they made them 3/5 of a person.
3/5, yeah. How long do senators serve?
6 years.
How long do representatives serve?
2 years.
Figure that into the equation. We've got a group of people, 100 people now, okay, in the Senate, 2 from each state, they serve 6 years. Does that say anything about the type of person we assumed we were putting in that spot?
Are they, again, I'm really, really naive in this area, but are we required to have a Democrat and a Republican, or does that not,
No.
it could be anybody?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
In my mind, it says more about the nature of what they're representing in the Senate. They're representing each of the bunches of state laws rather than representing the people. That's why the House of Representatives has to be reelected so
But
much
you
more
could
often.
do that. I mean, if all we were concerned about is the 50 sets of laws, we could do that with the same term length,
We could.
okay?
I think the House of Representatives is reelected more frequently because they're supposed to reflect the will of the people, and it might change a lot quicker than the set of state laws that we're dealing with.
Okay.
I've often wondered how much of our form of government comes from England, in the sense that the Senate is more like what was the House of Lords.
Yeah. Upper
And
house.
the representatives are more like the House of Commons, and I think there's
Right.
some comparison there.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of it. I mean, part of the idea is the Senate serves for a longer period of time. There's more stability there, if you will, more continuity, okay? And also, some of the idea is, again, like the House of Lords. I mean, these are the people that maybe are a little more thoughtful, deliberative.
Patricians, right?
Yeah, patricians, you know, the wiser, body. The House of Representatives, they're elected every 2 years. I mean, it's a bunch of people. They're representing a much smaller constituency, so they have much more localized interest, okay? I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, Barney Frank just said he's not running again, okay? Well, one of the reasons he said he's not running is they reapportioned his district, which we'll talk about a little later too. They reapportioned his district, and all of a sudden he had like 150,000 people that he had never represented before. He didn't, he would have to learn what their interests were, and he just wasn't prepared to do that, okay, at his age. But that's the idea of a representative. I mean, they have a small group of people, okay, that they are representing, and we swap them out every 2 years. Well, we revote every 2 years for them, okay? So they were intended to be much more responsive to special interests, to short-term interests, okay? The Senate was a much more stable institution. They served for longer periods of time. They represented a much broader spectrum. I mean, it might be an entire state, but, I mean, it was a much broader spectrum than the representatives, okay? So two different perspectives, if you will, were represented, okay? Now, in terms of breaking things, the Senate is not representative of the one man, one vote kind of concept at all, okay? As you just mentioned. I mean, there's a big disparity between how many people's point of view each senator represents, okay? Now, on top of that, what's a supermajority requirement, supermajority vote requirement?
2/3.
Well, not necessarily the number. I mean, what's the whole premise of a supermajority?
It's more than 50-50, right?
Yeah, something more than 50-50. In other words, I mean, when we're electing a president, if we were doing it by direct popular vote, what percentage of the vote does the president have to get? 50.01%, okay? Supermajority says, no, we're not going to decide things by a simple majority, 50% or better, 50% plus one. We're going to require some higher standard than that. Now, what that standard is varies a little bit depending on what the vote is, okay, what the significance of the vote. In the Senate, for most of what they do now, it's 60%, 60 senators, okay? Now, what does that do in terms of breaking government? It says a majority can't get it done, okay? You've got to have a supermajority. You've got to have much more than, half of the population on your side to get anything done, to get it through the Senate. What's that do? It makes it very difficult to get anything through the Senate, okay? In effect, a minority can prevent the majority from doing what they want to do, okay?
including the filibuster.
Yeah, I mean, basically what happens now, it used to be they actually had to filibuster. Okay, somebody actually had to get up on the floor of the Senate and talk, and talk, and talk. Now they don't have to do that. All they have to do is say, it's my intention to filibuster, and that's it. Okay? They don't actually have to go through with it anymore. They just have to threaten to do it. Okay? Now, it gets worse than that. What about committee procedures? Is there some way in which committee procedures, in effect, break government?
No idea.
Okay, one of the things the Senate does is advise and consent. It's called, okay? The president wants to appoint somebody, okay? The Senate, in effect, has to approve that, okay? Now, I mean, what are we talking about? Maybe the president wants to appoint somebody to a position on a federal court, okay? The Senate has to approve it. A single senator now can say, no, I don't like that, I'm not even going to let you vote on it. And they don't even have to say who they are. It's an anonymous, you know, they just put a hold on this. They, in effect, I think, say something like, I'm thinking about it, okay? And you can't vote until I'm done thinking about it, okay? So there are some things that need to get through the Senate that a single senator can block. Okay. A lot of committees, I mean, the two branches of government we've talked about, of the legislative branch, have all kinds of committees. We talked about cabinet positions. Well, I mean, they have committees for almost all of the same things, plus some others. A lot of those committees can block legislation by saying, we're not done looking at it yet. Okay? You can't vote on it yet because we haven't made our recommendation yet. So in effect, you can take a subset of the entire House of Representatives or the Senate and in effect hold up legislation with some small group of senators who are part of a particular committee. Okay? So again, I mean, it's in effect broken by design. Okay? Okay, one more in this area. What's reapportionment all about?
It's about determining what representative represents what area of the state and what group of people.
Okay.
But the controversy, as I understand it, the controversy about it has to do with you can design those areas in such a way to favor one party or another.
Yeah, okay, we're going to talk about this in two halves. One is reapportionment and the other we'll call gerrymandering. Okay? Why do we reapportion?
People move around.
Yeah.
Population change.
Okay, that's it. Okay, we've talked about the House of Representatives. I mean, is designed to be, in effect, one vote, one representative. I mean, it's not literally 1-to-1, but the idea is every representative in Congress should be representing the same number of people, whatever that is. I mean, you take the population and, you know, you say, okay, every representative is going to represent 50,000 people. But what 50,000? And how do we make sure it's always 50,000? Well, I mean, as Kitty says, people move around. So periodically, we have to take a census. And we have to say, okay, where is everybody right now? So that now we can take clumps of 50,000 people and assign a representative to each of those 50,000. Okay, that's reapportionment. It has a very legitimate purpose. Okay. And in the Constitution, in the original Constitution, it said, hey, we're basically going to do that every 10 years. Okay? Every 10 years, we'll take a new census, we'll see where everybody's located, and now we'll decide how many representatives each state gets. Okay? The problem comes in how you identify those 50,000 people. Okay? And that's where gerrymandering comes into play. Okay? Now, does anybody want to take a stab at explaining gerrymandering?
I can.
Go ahead.
You have two different states.
each has the same interstate going through it. Each has a city in it. The city has a very big population. Mostly in America, urban areas have more Democrats, right? We can just assume that these areas are, for this discussion, 100% Democrat. And they're surrounded by a whole bunch of areas that are Republican around them. Well, one place can draw their lines for their representatives so that the city gets a 100% Democrat vote and creates a Democrat representative, and then creates 4 Republicans. The next one can decide to split up the city so that portions of the city extend out for very long distances, and it dilutes the Democrat vote in that urban area. So by this, they can control how many representatives are Democrat or Republican in the state. It's very, very horribly abused in Texas.
Well, it's in the Supreme Court in Colorado right now. They're debating the reapportionment. Now, it has come up at various times in history, but I mean, one time it came up is when blacks started voting, and depending on how you reapportion, you could say, hey, this is going to be a black district, they're going to get a representative in Congress. And another way you could do it is you could say, well, we're going to take all of these black voters right here, and we're going to put half of them over here and half of them over here, and they're going to get outvoted by the white people in these 2 sections, and they won't get a representative. Okay? That's what gerrymandering is, and it happens every 10 years. Okay? It's a battle every 10 years to decide how are those districts going to be set up. Okay?
And is that 10 years coincidental with the census? Is that
Yes.
10 years?
Yeah, it coincides with the census because that's when reapportionment takes place.
Yeah, and it's been exacerbated lately because you've got so many other unique groups. You've got Hispanics now. You still got a Catholic vote. You've got, again, black votes. And now you've got various immigrant groups coming in. So, yeah, I think it's getting more and more difficult to do this.
Well, what's happened is since the advent of computers, they can do it much more accurately, okay, than they used to be. Okay, I mean, it used to be they might say, okay, there's a river, and the south side of the river is all of the blacks, so we'll do this. Or the north side of the river is all of the blue collar workers, so we'll do this. Well, I mean, they don't have to do it that way now. They have all of the voter records. I mean, they don't necessarily know how you voted, but they know how, everybody on this side of town and this polling station voted, so they can say, hey, this is predominantly Democratic or Republican, whatever. They get very, very scientific about it, okay? So, it crops up every 10 years. It's one of those, I mean, it makes perfect sense to do reapportionment, but it's become politicized.
How do they keep it accurate? I mean, so many people don't do the census.
It's accurate enough for their purposes.
Okay.
And here's what it does. We live in Colorado Springs, okay? How likely is it that we're going to have a Democrat representative?
Unlikely.
Okay, unlikely, okay? One of the reasons is because that's the way the districts have been drawn, okay? And that's what happens. You'll hear it on the news, and it may or may not register what they're saying, but they'll say, so-and-so is in an uncontested district, okay? It means that district has been created through the reapportionment process in such a way that any Republican that runs in this district, is going to beat any Democrat that wins, okay? So you can say, hey, the House of Representatives is 400 and some odd representatives, but only a small portion of those are actually up for a vote. I mean, the rest of them, it's already been decided. The phrase is the politician selects their voters. Okay? Through the reapportionment process, they in effect choose who's going to vote for them. And that's where most of the battles get won. Okay? So that by the time it actually comes to the vote, in one sense, your vote doesn't count. It's already been decided.
And when they only get enough voters in their district to maintain their own seat at plus, a certain percentage, that's what creates a lot of division politically in that district. It's further dividing America.
Yeah.
It's why we have, pretty much 50-50 between two political parties, because they're dividing America that way.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of it now, okay, Doug Lamborn is our representative. He doesn't have to say anything that's going to appeal to Democrats. He doesn't have to say much that's going to appeal to independents. Okay? He just needs to talk to his base. And his base has enough people in his district to guarantee he's going to win. Okay? And that's what reapportionment is all about. Okay? So that's the sense, again, in which government is broken, but to some extent broken by design. I mean, that's the way it was set up. It makes sense that we reapportion. Okay?
But who decides on how things are split up? Because it seems to me like that's the whole point of gerrymandering, is that somebody's going in and manipulating those lines to their advantage. Who has the power to do that?
The party in power.
I see. Okay.
That's why, in effect, elections around census time are even more significant, because the party in power is typically the one that makes up the districts. Okay? Now, the safeguard against it, in one sense, was civil rights legislation for a long time, because people could challenge the districts that had been set up based on charges of discrimination. Okay, they could in effect say, you're denying me, my segment of the population, a vote by doing this. And they could challenge it in court. And that's why in Colorado right now, that's where it is. The Supreme Court of Colorado is looking at the redistricting maps that have been submitted by the Democrats and the Republicans, okay, and choosing between them, okay? So, an important area in which I would say government is broken. Okay, another sense in which it can be broken is by historical developments, okay? I mean, things have happened and that causes a problem. All right, let me start with probably one of the earliest. I mean, even at the time the Constitution was set up, we had factionalism, and it got even worse. Okay, I mean, we had the farmers and the business people. We had, blacks and whites, or Italians and whatever, or Catholics and this. I mean, we had factionalisms. Now they're entrenched in political parties. Okay, and those political parties represent different factions within the government. And even at the time all of this was set up, I mean, the founders, if you will, knew that was going to be a problem. Okay? But, I mean, that also breaks government, and we'll see a little later, I mean, how that manifests itself. But just the idea that you have different groups of people with different points of view, I mean, tends to break the system. Okay, what effect did something like 9/11 have on government functions?
Immediately, people were willing to react to 9/11. And when things like the Patriot Act came along, not a lot of people argued against it because they still had 9/11 in their minds.
Okay. Now, I mean, let's talk about the Patriot Act. I mean, in what sense did that affect government?
It gave it more power.
Yeah. Okay, we in effect sacrificed some of our liberties, if you will, presumably in exchange for security. Okay? So we take it for granted now. You go fly an airplane, I mean, you're gonna have to take your shoes off, you're gonna have to put your bags on the cart, you're gonna have to go through the scanner. I mean, we take that for granted now, okay? But that's not, in effect, the way things were initially set up, okay? So, events like that, I mean, 9/11 resulted in the Patriot Act. The one we mentioned earlier, Posse Comitatus, came out of the Civil War, okay? I mean, what happened? I mean, in effect, federal troops were sent into the South, and people didn't like that, okay? So, I mean, in effect, they had to react against it. But events like that make a difference. Now, I'm going to mention an event now that I think has had a very significant one, the 24-hour news cycle, okay? What effect has that had on our government? When do political campaigns start?
Oh,
Way
actually,
too soon.
When do they stop?
I just
Yeah,
watched
when
who
do
did
they
the first
stop?
political campaign, and oh my goodness, what was it like? Was it Eisenhower? Or?
Uh,
It was a while back. It was one that I was shocked at. I was like, seriously, that long ago they started doing like political campaigning and like the first commercials for president bashing the other president kind of thing. It was a lot farther back than I thought.
Yeah.
Oh, it's horrible.
They didn't start,
Doing the 24, yeah, I know. Till,
because I mean, now it's
yeah, I know, but.
well over a year.
Oh,
And people are, I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at it now, when did Mitt Romney start running for president? 6 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
Okay? All right? Political campaigns, I mean, basically start the day after the polls close, right? I mean, the next campaign starts, okay? Now, on top of that, what's the character of the campaign if you've got to generate news 24 hours a day? I mean, you look for every little detail, every little conflict. I mean, look, we have a dog in here. I mean, I remember one of the Republican presidential debates, for 2 days, the big controversy was Obama had scheduled his presentation on the same day as the debate,
Oh, yeah.
And I'm thinking, this is news? But, I mean, they have to manufacture controversy, okay? So, that says politicians are always campaigning.
Always, and unfortunately, it just makes everyone so divided. I mean, because it's 24-hour streaming of bashing them and bashing them. People don't do their research to actually find out about the person running itself. All they do is listen to the news that's just been fabricated and taken one little speech out of one little sentence out of context, blow it up into a million things, which he wasn't even talking about that. You just took it out from a speech 6 years ago, and so it's terrible.
Who decided the 24/7 news cycle?
Ted Turner.
CNN.
Yeah.
And then everybody is
Oh, it's a
accepted
masterful
that.
business decision, though.
Business, so
Yes.
businesses caused our current information flood.
Okay. It's also made it expensive.
Made which expensive?
It's
The
made
campaigns?
campaigning
Yeah.
expensive, okay? Because now you have to buy TV time, okay? You have to buy radio commercials, print, so on, okay? It's very expensive, which means when the candidate is not actually campaigning, they're fundraising, okay? So they have very little time to actually do the functions that we've said they have, okay?
That may be good.
Could be.
Hadn't thought of it that way.
I heard an explanation the other day, though, of why Congress is so dysfunctional, and I had never thought of this, but this guy was explaining that, basically he was pointing out that before we had air travel, most congressmen, senators stayed in Washington D.C. the whole term because they couldn't, unless they were in just the immediate adjacent states, it wasn't practical to get on a train or a car and drive back home. Now, a vast majority of them leave on, I think it's Friday or Thursday night, and they don't come back to do work until Tuesday. And one of the things he pointed out that I thought about, that I thought, well, this is interesting, they don't socialize together the way they used to. And some people might think that's bad, but that's also the basis for being able to compromise, is if you're used to being friendly and sociable with people, you're more likely to be able to compromise, and they don't do that now.
Yeah.
And again, it's because air travel's made it possible for them to not be where they really ought to be.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, now we'll get into another area, and I call it broken by voter participation or lack thereof. Okay. One of the reasons government is broken is because we elected them. Okay, I mean, you know, it's the government we have is the government we voted for. Okay. So some of, you know, what is broken about it, we deserve it. I mean, because that's the way we did it. Now, if you get into why that's the case, okay, part of it I'll chalk up to voter ignorance. Now, I'm not criticizing individual people and saying they're ignorant, but I'm saying it's a very complex world out there, okay? And I mean, we're electing people to vote for us, and many people sort of think we understand all the issues, okay? And we don't. We don't have time to learn about those issues. I mean, even if we had time, we'd probably have to specialize in a particular area, just as our representatives do. I mean, they go there, they get assigned to a particular committee, and that's what they specialize in, you know, and they may not know anything about a lot of the other areas. So it's a very complex world, but we're expecting the average person to, in effect, decide who would be the best person to make those kind of decisions for us, okay? And we don't take the time. I mean, I know in the last election, I mean, Kitty and I got our ballot, and it's like, okay, we might know about one of the people that's on the ballot, and the rest of them say, I mean, I have no idea who ought to be on the school board, or, you know, I mean, here's an issue, and I'm reading one paragraph and trying to make a decision whether that makes sense or not, okay? Well, I mean, most people just don't have the time to fully research it and make informed decisions. So we're often voting out of ignorance. We're often voting out of incomprehension of the issues, okay? And I mean, I mentioned too, I can't imagine the average person making a good decision on immigration or budgeting. I mean, those are complex issues.
Well, and most people just vote for their party. They may not know anything about anything these people stand for, but Republican, 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 Republican. I won't vote for a Democrat. Really? Well, you just voted away your life, my dear, or whatever the case may be, so.
There's certain obvious things that don't take a whole lot of education. You don't spend money you don't have forever. Like we've run up a $15 trillion national debt.
But that's a very different issue than saying, but what do you do with the federal budget? I mean, it's one thing to say, yeah, you don't spend money you don't have. That's great. It's a simplistic
Talking about the
answer.
national debt, the budget.
It's true.
Is a yearly.
But does that mean we shouldn't have gone to war in Iraq because we couldn't afford it? Okay.
No, it's obvious that we shouldn't plan on spending money we don't have indefinitely. That's obvious. Doesn't take a whole lot of voter education to come up with that.
But it does have a lot of voter education to know who is the best person to send there to deal with that kind of question.
Well, then you listen to debates.
But I think, again, what Holly mentioned is people take a shorthand process, okay? And I've got this down here somewhere. Oh, in fact, I think the next thing I've got. I would suggest that most people vote for someone now based on ideology rather than any knowledge of or assessment of their actual qualifications, okay? You know, I mean, does Doug Lamborn really know anything about some particular problem? Or do people vote for Doug Lamborn because he says, I'm a conservative, I'm in favor of family values, whatever. So people say, that sounds like the kind of person that's somewhat like me, so I'm going to send him, okay? is that the way we would interview someone for a job in business? You know, would we bring somebody in for an interview and say, tell me what you think about the abortion issue so I can decide whether you're going to be a good programmer or not? I mean, it doesn't make sense, but that's what we do.
I'm always intrigued in our society how we spend this huge amount of money and effort vetting people for professional teams, football teams, baseball teams, etc. We seem to know pretty darn well whether they're going to perform well and how they're going to perform once they get on the ball field, and yet we don't do that with our politicians, and it seems a little stupid when you get right down to it, that we put all that effort into professional sports but not into running our country.
I second that.
Well, and that's another thing I just got back. But part of the blame also goes to the American people. There are powers of impeachment that lie within the people to get petitions and whatnot, but we don't do that. So we are to blame just as much as them, if not more.
Yeah, and that was the point of this whole section. I mean, one of the reasons government is broken is because of us, okay, because of the voters. Okay. Yeah.
I recently had some problems with Mayor Bach here, and I've looked back at what got him elected because I just moved back here since December, and I might have agreed with him on a few of the issues that he would run on, but to know how he runs things personally and how I just got kicked out of his office for having this camera, I would not have voted for him because of the way he actually runs things,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
issues aside.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the point we're hitting, that,
That's another big
yeah,
one.
that we don't look at, you know, are they really going to be equipped to do the job?
Well, even then, a lot of politicians these days, they just say what you want to hear. It may not be what they plan on doing at all, but they know what will get them elected. So they're going, of course I believe in family values. Of course I believe in anti-abortion. Of course I believe. And then they get in there and you're like, what? You know, so they have nothing to do with anything that they say.
Actually, I think we do have, in one sense, an exception to that rule. I'll mention Herman Cain as an example. Okay? I mean, to me, Herman Cain's problem has nothing to do with the charges of sexual harassment or anything else. He got in the debates and, you know, got to be the front runner, so people actually started listening to him. And I think most people are saying, this guy is not equipped to be president. You know, I don't care if he's a nice guy. I don't care if he's well-spoken. I mean, he just doesn't have the knowledge to do that job. Okay? And I mean, that's what we need more of, is people looking at that aspect of a candidate. But in most cases, we don't.
Well, and reading between those lines, because Romney to this year versus back when he ran against Obama, you're looking at two different candidates, completely two separate candidates. You're like, where are all what you were standing by then, you're not standing by now, and he just plays to the camera. So it's like, really, people have to read between that and go, wait a second, let me read the tapes from back then, because this is not the same guy, this is not the same candidate.
But that's interesting. Should that be a negative? Yeah. I mean, if somebody says, you know, I think differently than I did.
Well, and as long as they come up with that, as long as they listen, yeah, I know I said this then, you know, through my last 4 years of experience, I'm wavering on that issue, this is kind of where I stand these days, but no, oh no, I've always believed that.
But, I mean, again,
No, you
I mean,
didn't.
that's the case where in Romney's case, you could point to some of his qualifications. You could say, okay, he served in this position, did reasonably well. He served in this position, he did reasonably well. But then people will say, oh, but he's a Mormon. Okay?
I got freedom of religion on that one.
Yeah, I mean, then they fall back on
You know how to
ideology.
make money.
Okay. I mean, in one sense, people spend too much time trying to say, is this person like me? Okay, that's who I want to send. And we don't do that. I mean, you mentioned sports. You know, in sports, I mean, the idea would be, you know, this guy's an asshole, but man, can he play? Put him on the team. Okay? I mean, we have very different criteria in other areas.
Yeah, I brought up time and again, if Ben Franklin had been evaluated on the family values issue, he never would have represented us.
Never made it.
And yet we would
His
have,
family US.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's one of the best statesmen we ever had, so,
yeah.
yeah, there's times where you really shouldn't be paying too much attention to their family values.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I mean, with Newt Gingrich, this was a post I posted on Facebook. Herman Cain, sex scandal, status terminated. Newt Gingrich, sex scandals, multiple confirmed, married the woman he cheated on with his wife, has flip-flopped on issues a myriad of times, has ridiculed Fannie and Freddie in public and private, taken money from them, status frontrunner.
Yeah.
But
Who's the smartest guy in town?
Yeah, but that could be an interesting thing. I mean, some of the polls I've seen, everybody will say, who's the best qualified to be president, of the current GOP candidates? And Newt Gingrich typically comes out on top. I mean, he's clearly well-educated, articulate, thoughtful, so on.
And he has a
So
lot of
maybe this year there's a
experience.
change.
Yeah, a lot of
That's what I'm
experience.
saying. So
And then
maybe
it says, who do you like? And he ranks on the bottom, okay? So, I mean, it is sort of an interesting one, whether he might get elected in spite of, okay, all those other things.
Let me say something about Romney. How are you a Republican from a long line of Republicans and get elected governor of the state of Massachusetts? How do you do that?
Yeah.
being very
Beyond me.
liberal.
So,
Yeah.
I'll throw this out. It's impressed me a lot of times if you listen to ex-politicians, okay? Very often, they come across as really very thoughtful, intelligent. They're very different people than they were when they had to run for office. Okay? I mean, it's almost like it's two different things. I've got to be this kind of person to get elected. Then I can do what I'm really supposed to be doing. Okay? But they have to appeal to the voters.
Yeah.
So, Romney is good at that in the sense that, he speaks to who the audience is. Okay? And if he weren't a Mormon, he'd probably be the
I
first.
think Gingrich is not a man I would imagine myself speaking up for until this immigration thing. And he spoke, in my opinion, the truth, the facts about the immigration issue. We cannot expel 18 million people and split up 18 million families. And that's what he tried to tell us. He and Ron Paul has also tried to tell the American people some things they just don't want to hear. And he doesn't get the news coverage of it, but sometimes the American public as a whole, not just Democrats or Republicans, just doesn't want to hear certain things that are in fact probably things they should be told and they should be listening to.
Yeah, I could expand on that, but we'd be here all night.
I have to share this. I read a piece. I think I may have sent you the link on it. It was talking about how masterful Gingrich's immigration proposal is. And the reason is this. What he was suggesting is, okay, we clearly can't kick out 12 million illegal immigrants. So what we do is give them a path to legalization, not citizenship, legalization. Here's the subtle part of that. If you make them legal, they get counted in the census. And that affects the reapportionment process. You get more representation in Congress.
But they can't
But they
vote.
can't vote.
Oh.
Okay? So you make them legal, which means certainly red states in particular, and they actually had like the numbers in the different states. And some of the red states would benefit a great deal by the additional representation, but they can't vote, which is key because in many cases they would be voting Democratic. So it was, a very clever kind of plan.
A little broken government thing, doing these types of things with
Yeah, we'll get to that in the next section, but
Kind of counteracts Acorn, doesn't it?
that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The last thing I had under broken by voter participation is apathy. I mean, that's the other side of it, that people just don't vote. I mean, they say for whatever reason, you know, there's no point in me voting, or I'm too lazy to vote, or whatever, so they don't.
The thing, well, okay. From what I've heard, there are two ways to basically fix the government. One of those ways is something we did way back in the day and we all want to avoid. The second way is to elect.
Worked before.
The second way is to elect good, wholesome people into the Senate and Congress. The reason why, you know, we're always choosing Democrat or Republican, and no offense to anyone, but it's usually just the lesser of two evils, is basically what that is. Now, everyone's going, well, vote for someone else, vote for someone else. But everyone's going to be in the mentality of it's a wasted vote. This person isn't going to get the kind of coverage by the media or anyone to, you know, convince people that he's the candidate to vote for. Therefore, people are going to be like, no, sorry, man, and they vote for the lesser of the two evils. So it's not only an apathy problem, it's also a mentality problem.
Okay. This is not directly opposed to that, but it's something else I saw that pertains a little bit. I read something a while back that was talking about when we've historically in the past been in dire financial straits or whatever. I mean, you know, the economy has been in the pits or whatever. How did we get out of it? And the answer was by overwhelmingly electing one party or the other. We've mentioned the supermajority requirements, okay? Well, the idea is if you elect, I mean, let's say you elect 70% Republican or 70% Democrat, all of that goes away, okay? And now, whatever party is in power implements their solution, whatever it is, and that's going to change the situation. Okay? The problem we have now is that we're so polarized that nothing gets done, so we're just left with the same situation we have. Okay.
I mean, I don't know if this fits into what you're saying, but it's the perception that there are politicians right now who, you know, there might be a good solution out there, but because it was proposed by somebody in this party, nobody in that party is going to support it, because if it succeeds, it's going to make that party look good. So they're just not going to support it. And to me, that's really broken. And that sort of goes along
It's
with
all out
what
of
you were
spite.
just
Like,
saying.
even if I
Right.
agree with you, I can't agree with you because you're a Democrat or because you're a Republican.
Because you are that,
Yeah.
and if I agree with you, and if we pass this thing, and if it works,
It makes you
I'm
look-
not gonna get credit for it, it's gonna make you and your
You,
party
right.
look good. So, you know, that, I
Well,
can't afford to do that, so I'm not gonna play.
The focus has gone to, it's all about me, not about, it's about our country now, what is good for our country.
That's what it
This
seems like
country
to
would be
me.
better if we just got rid of Democrats and Republicans in general and everybody was an independent, but that'll never happen.
And I made a
That
video.
wouldn't solve anything either.
I'm sorry?
But, I mean, in fact, getting rid of everybody that's there.
Well, nobody would have a label. Now you'd have to actually, oh, who is this person and what do they represent? I don't know, they're not a Democrat or Republican, what do I vote for?
But if we get into, like, why hasn't that happened? Why has a third-party candidate never been successful? Actually, there was one, I forgot where, somewhere.
Probably for the
somewhere in
same
history.
reason Holly just said, is that it's easier for people to vote along party or, you know, the ideal lines and not sort
I'm
of vote
saying,
for the
like,
person.
legit, get rid of Democrat, get
But-
rid of Republican, get rid of the names.
Yeah,
completely.
but that's what I'm saying. It's like, how can you do that?
I don't know, I'm just saying it should have
And
never started.
part of the problem is it takes money to get elected, okay? A third-party candidate never has, not just money, but I mean the organization to go with it. I mean, a lot of the current cycle, they'll talk about one reason Romney is probably going to win is because he has a better organization. He's got people in place on the ground to get out his voters, to make the phone calls. Okay? A third-party candidate doesn't have that. That's why parties evolved. Okay? It was sort of like, I want to run for office. What's my best chance to win? If I get together with you and we run together. Okay? We run as a slate. Okay? And now, we'll get in a third party and we'll fill in a slate and we'll run as a slate, okay? And now, I may not be the best candidate, but if I can identify myself with somebody else who is. I mean, they talk about winning on someone's coattails, okay? If I align myself with Obama and he wins, I might win even though nobody liked me, okay? And that's how parties came about. And in every country, in every democracy, there are always parties. Okay? You can't identify one anywhere where, in effect, it's all independence. Now, you have some countries where you could have 50 parties. Okay? We're somewhat unique because we only have 2. Okay? And that comes with its own set of problems. Okay? But if you got 50 parties, you also have your own set of problems. Okay?
And to go back to what you said about everyone just trying to make themselves look better, I've actually done a few videos on that. I do videos on politics on YouTube, and my language is very explicit. But yeah, I've been going on about that. Everyone is trying to make themselves look bigger. It's the me, myself, and I mentality. How can I make myself look better? How can I make everyone around me look lesser? The holier than thou feeling. And I've said this back at when I was at Occupy. I said this when I was attending some other meetings. You get a bunch of people together, a bunch of Americans together, people in Congress are actually very well representing, if you consider it.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a whole bunch of Americans together, we're not too different from that. If somebody says something political, and it's their job to talk politics and be opinionated. And if you get a bunch of people who love to talk politics and are opinionated, there you go. Nobody can admit, okay, my way may not be the best way. His way may be the better way. I'm going to step down. No, it's, I got to make myself bigger than you.
Right?
And that's where the deadlock comes from. Nobody can submit, but that also ties into our culture.
That's just pride.
Yeah. But we've gotten into it, but the last category I had here is broken by the exercise of self-interest. I mean, a lot of the ways in which it's broken is because people are looking out for their own self-interest. So, yeah, nobody is going to, no Republican is going to stand up right now and say, in these areas, Obama did a pretty good job. Okay? Instead what they're going to do is say, well, we're not going to talk about that, 50, 60, 70, 80%, whatever it is. We're going to talk about this area where I can say I'm better. Okay? That's what I'm going to emphasize.
On the theme of apathy, on Meetup 2 days from now, on Wednesday, the Green Dragon Tavern, they're passing out flyers to remind people that the deadline to register as a Republican is coming up. And even if you're a Democrat, in some states they allow people to vote in any primary they want to.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I think in
this
this
one
one,
you have to register.
you have to register as a Republican if you actually want to have any say in who the 2 people are we're going to be choosing from.
Yeah.
But you can also change on the day of the election too, I believe.
Well, you can always vote for the person that you want to vote for in the end.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I think I'm
Yeah.
probably going to register for the party that's not in power every time, just so that I have more say in who gets to the final decision.
Yeah.
And I like that the tavern is passing out flyers just to increase awareness of this.
Yeah.
But just to go on with what you said before, as a registered Republican, let me be the first to tell you, thank you, Obama, for finally pulling the troops out.
But
Yeah.
you're not going to hear many of them saying that. Right?
Well, you know what? There are people who will deny the truth, and those are the people who I just tune
They
out.
have been giving him praise for the Libyan decision.
Yeah, some. But, yeah, some, and then the rest are saying, well, but he should have been
Oh,
more
yeah.
involved,
Or
or,
at least they
yeah,
give them a positive,
yeah.
which is
Yeah.
good.
Good example.
Okay, the first thing I had in that category was, I mean, one of the reasons we have a broken system is career politicians. I mean, a politician's job is to get reelected. Okay, that's their primary job. And I mean, I can't blame them. I mean, how many people are going to say, I'm willing to go through all it takes to run for Congress to serve for 2 years? I mean, they're just not going to do that. Okay? They're going to go saying, I'm going to get elected and then I'm going to serve like Barney Frank for 32 years. Okay? I mean, that's a career. And I mean, I can't blame them for doing that.
The founding fathers didn't have that in mind.
They didn't have that in mind. Right. Right.
Well, and that also goes with lobbyism. I mean, how much do you think a lobbyist pays a politician, you know, per favor? And that goes to political contributions.
How many politicians leave without being close to the millionaire status?
Yeah, very, very few.
Very few, I'm sure. I figured they would all be over millionaires.
Yeah, most are, some aren't.
Where's that money come
Not their paychecks.
Well,
Well, they're trying to get it that way.
yeah, I mean, like Gingrich, I mean, he got out and then got him, what, $1.5 million or $1.7 million, something like that.
from? From Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac?
Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac.
Insider trading, though, that's one of
That
those.
was,
Yeah.
that was legitimate.
Yeah.
That one, we get arrested, we get that.
There was an interesting thing on that. It was a quote from some politician around 1905, and he was, I mean, in effect, justifying insider trading. I mean, it was basically saying, well, I mean, who wouldn't do this? You know, I'm a politician, I find out, you know, such and such is going to happen, and that's going to affect this industry. Why shouldn't I take advantage of that knowledge? Okay, and
Well, the rest of us can. Have fun with it.
yeah, so.
You mentioned the primary purpose of a politician in his own mind is to get reelected. But each politician, a senator, representative, takes an oath of office, which flies in the face of the mission of getting reelected.
That's true.
Well, I think that if you look at how many people get pardoned at the end of someone's term of service when they know that they're not getting reelected either through a term limit or being outed by a vote, you know, right at the end, they all of a sudden decide to have a conscience and pardon a whole bunch of people. You know, that's something that they maybe should have done in the first place if they believed that those people should have been pardoned, but they wait, you know.
Yeah, a lot of their decisions are, is this going to get me reelected or not?
And yeah, what I think needs to happen in that sense is they need to follow New Hampshire. In their legislatures, make $100 a year. Any kind of lobbyism that is paid is automatic treason, which it should be. I mean, you can lobby. I mean, that's what they did back in the day. You sat there and you told your congressman or congresswoman, you know, these are the problems we're having, do you think you can help us out? But the minute you pay for it, that's bribery, flat out.
Yeah. There's so much you can do, though, that is short of bribery. And a lot of, I mean, most of us have very low opinions of lobbyists, okay? But think of it this way. Why do people join country clubs? You know, why do business people join country clubs? It's for the contacts, okay? I mean, you get to know someone, you become their friend. You don't have to bribe them to influence their opinion, okay? If they like you, if they respect you, you just have to say, have you considered this point of view, okay? And they'll listen to you, and they're going to be influenced. And that's what a lobbyist does. Why are a lot of politicians, ex-politicians, lobbyists? Because they've already made the contacts. You know, they work with this guy for 10 years or whatever. So now if they get together with him over coffee or lunch, I mean, they don't have to bribe him. They just have to tell them to consider a particular point of view. Okay? And that's going to influence them. And that's what the lobbyist is there for. Okay?
But-
It doesn't have to be an outright bribe.
But then again, that's what makes it more appealing. Well, yeah, the contacts would make it as appealing. But the straight money you get through the lobbying, that's instant gratification, and that's what most Americans want.
I'd be willing to bet that most congressmen are not as much swayed by the money as by, in fact, the contacts. Okay? That, I mean, that's where their opinions are shaped. Okay? I mean, if you associate with a bunch of people of a particular point of view, you're going to tend to adopt that point of view. Okay? And, you know, I mean, we could say, okay, a lot of Republicans are associated with a lot of wealthy people. Okay? I mean, a lot of congressmen of either party are associated with with people with more money. Okay? They don't tend to be associated with, you know, the gardener, the plumber, the electrician. I mean, they're associated with a particular group of people. It's not at all surprising that their views coincide with the views of the people they associate with. Okay? And, you know, I mean, that's the sense in which the system is broken. On the other hand, I mean, if you take organizations like AARP, okay? I mean, hey, they are supposed to be lobbying, okay? They're supposed to be lobbying for a particular group of people. We want them to lobby, okay? And I mean, everybody wants their point of view represented. The difference is many people can't afford the lobbyist. They can't afford to get their point of view represented. But that doesn't mean that the people who are getting their point of view represented are necessarily issuing bribes. I mean, I would venture to say Newt Gingrich does not believe he was bribed. Okay? I mean, he will certainly tell you he doesn't even think he was lobbying. Okay? He was hired because he was a historian. Okay? I mean, that's stupid. But
That's what he is.
that's what he is. He's a historian. And certainly from his point of view, all he was asked to do is sit down and talk to some of his friends. Okay? And express his point of view. He was not asked to go to one of his friends and offer him $50,000 to vote a particular way. Okay? I mean, I just don't see that. But he was invited to go talk to certain people and influence their opinion. Okay? And he didn't even have to say, you know, hey, on Bill XYZ, I really think you ought to vote this way. I mean, he could simply go in and say, you know, have you heard the latest stuff about global warming? I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me. Okay? And I mean, he can influence somebody's point of view by doing that. Because of his position, because of his status, because of the way he's viewed. Okay? I mean, if I sat down and talked with some professor from Harvard who was speaking in his area of expertise, I'd be influenced. Okay? I'd say, this guy probably knows what he's talking about. He could be wrong, but he's at least worth listening to. It's at least worth listening to his point of view. And that's what the lobbyists are doing. Okay. Now, that's not to say it hasn't broken the system, but it doesn't have to be viewed as this, I mean, devious kind of activity. It's exactly what we would expect everybody to be doing, and we'd be doing it, you know, if we had the money to do that. Yeah, I was actually telling Kitty at the beginning, I didn't know if this meeting was going to be part one of 2 or 3 or 4, or if we'd get to all of it tonight. It's more likely to be part one of 2, 3, or 4.
Considering what time it already is.
Yeah, considering what time it is, I'd like to do this one thing and then we'll wrap it up. One of the things that, I mean, we've all talked around in this area that is the sense in which it's broken is the hyper-partisanship. And I wanted to read you this one editorial I saw a few days ago that I thought sort of addressed that pretty well. It's by someone called Steve Benen, B-E-N-E-N, who writes a blog, a political animal, I guess is the name of his blog. It said, Robert Gates, a respected elder statesman of the political establishment, former Secretary of Defense, okay, recently delivered some provocative remarks on the health or lack thereof of the American political system. Brian Butler had a good item on this the other day, noting the increasing frequency with which prominent voices not prone to hyperbole or alarmism are raising awkward questions. The GOP's hyperpartisan turn after Barack Obama's victory in 2008 meant the 112th Congress was destined to test the limits of dysfunctional governance. But it also happened to coincide with a moment in history when the country needed the government to do better than the bare minimum. Instead, it's done less, and that's shaken people who've spent their careers steering the ship of state. Quote, I do believe that we are now in uncharted waters when it comes to the dysfunction in our political system, and it is no longer a joking matter, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates told an audience 2 weeks ago at the Constitution Center in Philadelphia, where he received the Liberty Medal for National Service. Quote, it appears that as a result of several long-building, polarizing trends in American politics and culture, we have lost the ability to execute even the basic functions of government, much less solve the most difficult and divisive problems facing the country. Thus, I am more concerned than I have ever been about the state of American governance. James Fallows noted the same remarks, emphasizing Gates's demeanor. I specifically recognize how carefully he has always chosen his public words, Fallows wrote. For such a person to say plainly that the American government has lost its basic ability to function and that he is more concerned than he has ever been about this issue is, well, it's worth more notice than it's received so far. I often think of a column E.G. Dunn Jr. wrote a while back in which he asked, can a nation remain a superpower if its internal politics are incorrigibly stupid? I'm a chronic optimist about America, but we are letting stupid politics, irrational ideas on fiscal policy, and an antiquated political structure undermine our power. We need a new conservatism in our country that is worthy of the name. We need liberals willing to speak out on the threat our daft politics poses to our influence in the world. We need moderates who do more than stick their fingers in the wind to calculate the halfway point between two political poles. And yes, we need to reform a Senate that has become an embarrassment to our democratic claims. And I'd argue we need well-intentioned Republicans who care about the national interest to realize something has gone fundamentally wrong with their party and to work to help bring it back. Dion wrote that column, by the way, in July 2010. There's ample evidence conditions have deteriorated since, and the incorrigible stupidity is more pronounced. Some have even begun suggesting it's part of a larger effort on the part of the radicalized right to deliberately undermine confidence in America's public institutions and create conditions in which voters give up on government altogether. If the public considers this unacceptable, they're going to have to say so. This week, in the midst of a job crisis and intense public demand for congressional action, Republicans killed the credible jobs bill for no apparent reason. Most Americans support the American Jobs Act's provisions. It enjoys strong support from economists. It includes ideas from both parties. And the Congressional Budget Office found it will even lower the deficit over the next decade. And despite all of this, literally every Republican in the Senate, including the alleged, quote, moderates, not only rejected the popular bill, they refused to even let the chamber vote on it at all. This happened, at least in part, because GOP officials didn't want to give Obama a win. As Gates put it, it's no longer a joking matter. This pertains to what we were talking about earlier, that, in this case, it doesn't matter if the other guy's got a good idea. It's my job is to get reelected.
EJ is as far left as you can get, number one. Number two, the jobs bill, I believe, had to do with raising taxes. Right?
See, this is part of the problem, though, okay? We have become so polarized that, and we're so committed, as politicians, so committed to get reelected, that we're not willing to look at what's good about the other guy's argument, okay? We look at something we can disagree with to make our point, and then we do anything we can to keep their point of view from being implemented.
That's because it's polarized and you don't have the, as pointed out, the communication
Right?
across the
Yeah,
aisle.
the sides are no
that you
longer
need
willing to talk to each other.
For the reasons mentioned, so.
There's another thing that's happened though, that I think is just extremely detrimental, and I'm amazed that any Republicans allowed themselves to get into this bind. But a lot of Republicans signed this pledge with this guy Grover Norquist,
Yeah.
where they said under no circumstance would they raise taxes. And now they're locked into that damn pledge, and you know, they'll either violate the pledge or they'll agree to raise somebody's taxes a little bit. And that, you know, that's just insanity for any politician, any congressman or senator should not, his first loyalty when he takes that oath should not be to Grover Norquist. It ought to be to the United States of America. And as far as I'm concerned, they've committed a form of treason by aligning themselves with a guy that isn't even an elected representative. I don't know how this guy pulled this off, but it's a disaster.
Something else I saw too, that it was talking about, I mean, both the House of Representatives and the Senate were intended to be deliberative bodies. I mean, you get a group of people together and you discuss the issues. And that no longer happens. That most of the comments that are made on the Senate floor, it's like there's one guy speaking into a microphone and everybody else is back in their offices. And when it's time for the vote, then everybody gathers, their staff members hand them a slip of paper that says, Bill such and such is coming up for a vote, here's how you ought to vote. They walk in, they cast the vote, and they go back out. So they're no longer getting together and hearing the other person's point of view. They only hear, in effect, what their staff is telling them, what their constituents tell them. Okay?
My wife says it's time to go home.
Yes, it is time. We probably will have a part 2 on this one then sometime, because there are a few things we haven't covered on it. And that's not surprising. We've had some other discussions that have gone to multiple parts. Okay? But I appreciate everybody coming and hanging around this long again. Have some cream puffs.
It was wonderful. Apple cider room, didn't partake at all.
Okay, and again, 2 weeks from tonight is our next one. Again, on
Dealing with uncertainty.
dealing with uncertainty. That's it, dealing with uncertainty.
Okay.
This is fun.